Welcome to the latest episode of Ed Influence. I'm Nick McKenzie from Brown Jacobson, and this episode is a special made up of two parts. In the first part, I'm delighted to be joined by John Camp, CEO of the Compass Partnership and President of the Association of School and College Leaders. In the second part, I then share with you some discussions with leaders at the Association of School and College Leaders annual conference earlier this year in Liverpool from the conference floor. But first to John. So thank you, John, for joining me today. I wanted to start by inviting you to tell me a story from your life that would give me a picture of who you are as a leader.
Hi, Nick. Nice to see you today. Yeah, really good question. I've actually told this story quite a few times, so people have probably heard some of it before. But I think probably the leader I am now is because of my own education experience. I'm a sort of a child from what would now be deemed a disadvantaged family. And growing up, we didn't have a great deal of money, and as a single parent, my mum was on a low income, so it's fair to say that we struggled at many times. But I was lucky to be in education at a time when a number of policies that sat around education contributed to my ability to be able to access education fully. So, my family made good use of school journey grants, clothing grants, free school meals, sixth form maintenance grants, all of those sort of additional interventions that meant that I was able to access education. But actually, another really crucial part was the part played by teachers. Because, of course, I could access that offer because I had the financial support. But I needed to know how to access that offer. I needed to know what was important, and I needed to know what decisions I needed to make that were going to have a profound impact on my future. And there are a number of teachers that had a profound impact on me, but most importantly was my sixth form tutor, who oversaw the whole process of applying to university and polytechnic at that time. So that there were two sort of forms that you had to fill in. You had to fill in an UCCA form and a PCAS form. Now, until she'd spoken to me about applying to university, I'd never really thought about university. It wasn't a conversation that we had in our family. My mum had been really clear with me that I was to stay on at sixth form and get A levels, because then that would give me access to a management training program actually at Marks and Spencer's, which she felt was the way I needed to go. So when my sixth form tutor asked me when I was thinking of applying, where was I going to apply, it was sort of a mystery to me. I'd never really had a conversation about university or polytechnic. And in fact, I didn't know the distinction between the two. So she sat me down and talked me through it. She talked about what those opportunities were. She talked about the differences between those organizations, and she talked about whether I'd be interested in continuing study. And of course, I loved school. I was always loved school. I loved primary school and I loved secondary school. And I loved learning. And I definitely, through my education, saw it as a liberator for me. It was something that I felt I was good at, I was successful at, and I knew that it would help me in the future, but I didn't quite know how profound that would be. So she sat me down, we looked through some of the options, and then I went home and spoke to my mum about it. But my mum really wasn't happy because, a low income family, what was important in our family is that as soon as you were able to go out and earn a wage, that's what you did. So I had a Saturday job, and I had to even contribute half of that to the family income because it was important for our survival. It enabled, us to have a reasonable standard of living. So she thought I was being lazy. She just thought I was looking for an extension to my education so that I didn't have to go out and earn. So she was really cross. So I went back the next day and I said to my tutor, it's not going to happen. I'm going to complete my A levels and go on to the management training scheme, hopefully at Marks and Spencer's. But she sat me down. She said, look, I understand that. I know these things are difficult, but let's have a go at filling the forms out. You just so that if you do decide to, you can do it. So she sat me down and we looked through the options. I'd been to visit none, no university, no polytechnic. So I didn't even know what they were like. I had no view on that. So we selected a couple. I filled out the forms, and she said, "Look, they're there if you need them." And off I went. Unbeknownst to me, and I don't know why she made this decision, but it was a very sort of insightful decision on her part. She sent those forms off, and the rest is history, really, because I then got offers, and that really was a pivotal point in my life, because I was then able to have a conversation with my mum about the fact that there were potential places for me to go to, and that I'd really like to study further. So actually, at that point, I think my mum was sort of calmed down a little bit. We had a conversation. I agreed that I would go to a London institution so that I could get a job. And in that way, I would live at home, contribute to the household income, but I would be able to do a degree. And that's exactly what I did. So I went to Thames Polytechnic. I accepted a course there, studied sociology and social history, and I held down a job. And that was able to pay, it was able to pay my mum to contribute to the household income. So that really was pivotal to me. And as a leader, that has stayed with me. It stayed with me because for me, what that teacher did, through an act, I think, of insight, compassion, but ultimately relational leadership, she, through a conversation and through that interaction, was able to shape my understanding of context, enable me to feel confident to be able to embrace opportunities I was not overly aware of, and ultimately change the course of life for me. And that's what took me into education, because I became really passionate about the change that education can make. I saw a number of my peers not do so well in education for a whole range of reasons, and I didn't want that to happen in the future. I could see that it made a difference to me, and that's underpinned my leadership, really. So as a leader, I'm very much focused on sort of relational leadership, servant leadership type models. And I've always focused on leading through interaction and connection. As you know, I'm not a distant leader. I don't lead from the desk. I lead from the point at which you meet people and talk to them. But importantly, absolutely driven and centered on ensuring that we make a difference to those children from families that have been disadvantaged by the system. And I'm really careful. I never talk about disadvantaged families, because everyone's context is personal to them. And I'm not here to judge personal context, but what I am here to try and do is really mitigate against some of those barriers that the system puts in front of certain families and certain children. So I'm absolutely driven, to make a difference. And the last bit, sorry, Nick, is that, knowledge is power. I know that's a cliche that is often used, but for me, knowledge was power. I didn't know about university. I didn't know about the opportunities on offer. And when I did know, I didn't know how to access it, because I had no idea of how to fill a form out or to tick those boxes. That teacher did that with me. She recognized that I needed that. And I think that's what good leadership is. It recognizes the strengths and the potential in everyone, and then it works with that person to enable them to access and make the most of that and use their individual talents to then thrive.
Thanks, John. I can see a very impactful story for you personally. Strikes me, looking back at that teacher, she saw you and she was prepared to take a bit of a risk, was she, perhaps?
I think maybe it was a calculated risk. Maybe she could see in me that she could see I needed that extra little, that extra little thing that would enable me to be brave enough to front up the conversation with my mum and say, look, actually, this is important to me. And in doing that, I was then able to find the solution ultimately that sort of satisfied both demands. My mum died last year, but if you're able to speak to my mum, she has no recollection of that. She's very proud of what her children have achieved. And she she would not remember that at all. But it's a very vivid memory of mine, because when you're in a house that struggles, that has always struggled financially, and you're aware that your mum is always balancing the demands of home and the family budget, you've developed a deep sense of responsibility that you should not contribute to the stress of that situation, that you should always seek ways to enable that to be better and not to make it worse. So you can end up denying yourself the opportunities that you might want because actually you need to be making decisions that help the family over your own needs, and that's something, and that stays with me. Actually, that's still very much part of me and who I am. That feeling that it's my responsibility to sort things out, that when things go wrong, it's my responsibility to deal with them.
Nicely teased me up. I was listening to you and I was wondering, fast forward many years, and then the various leadership roles you've had. How do you balance looking after yourself and your interests, John, and the organisation interests and that sort of responsibility? Because it came through very clearly, that sort of wanting to help the family, support your mum, as well as sort of have your own education and embracing that. As a leader, how have you juggled those two positions when you want to support your team, others, your schools, and also making space for you?
Yeah, I think I've probably got better at that, Nick, over time, because it's always felt, I know this isn't rational, but it's always quite selfish of me to think of me over the needs of others. And I think, I feel leadership in schools, and I feel blessed and very lucky to be in the position I am in. And I've always thought, absolutely loved being in schools. I think they're the best places to be in, because they're dynamic, they're energetic, and you see young people who have their hopes for the future, and you feel the world is in a really good place if they're going to embrace it. I think one of my weaknesses, and it is a weakness actually, and I've talked a lot about it, is that I worry too much, and I worry about what's not happened, and I worry about what I don't really have control of. Because of that, really, I think inside of me there's this voice that things need to be perfect, things need to work well, and if they don't, it's your responsibility. So I still struggle with that. But I think what it's made me, and I hope that if you were able to speak to people in my organization and leaders I work with, and I work with a fabulous team and they're absolutely amazing. Hopefully what they would say is that when things don't go right, and we know that often happens, I don't jump to judgment. I'm always looking to, okay, well, let's just sort this out. Because my first reaction is I need to sort this out. And what I've had to practice over time is that it's not for me to sort this out always. It's for me to help others to find a solution to work through this. So I think naturally my leadership style is quite collaborative, it's enabling, and ultimately it just seeks to empower others to feel confident about working through the issues and the problems they may encounter, or deliver on the passions and the drive that they are focusing on at the moment. So I think that that's sort of how it plays out in my leadership. Steve Jobs talked about the fact that you don't employ great people to tell them what to do. You employ great people so that they tell you what to do. I absolutely live by that. I think that is fundamentally the key to leading a complex organization that you could never hope to have complete control of, and nor should you have the desire to either. It's around really building the conditions for brilliant people to do brilliant work, and to contribute to sort of the tapestry of leadership that makes that organization the organization it is. But still in my mind, Nick, is that finger that points at me when anything goes wrong. And it's the one that tells me it's my fault and I need to deal with it. But I've learned to manage that better. I hope that makes sense.
No, thank you. Thank you. I thought, as you know, this is two-part special, so I thought I'd ask you a few of the questions I asked delegates at your very enjoyable conference from earlier this year. And the first question, John, is, and I appreciate this is going out publicly, so there's only so much you can say, but what's on your mind this week? What are the sorts of things that you're thinking about?
That's a good question. So there's one thing on my mind this week, which is budgets. It's that time of year, Nick. So we've had our gag statements in the trust. We know that money that's coming in. We've had our reception number. We know how many children we're getting into reception. We know what assumptions we need to base next year's sort of budgets on. So it's how we're going to make those budgets work in an environment where the complexity of needs are growing in schools. The demands on schools are greater. The things that we are expected to do are far more numerous. Actually, it feels like the resources each year are just getting less and less. So we're going through that budgeting cycle, and that's what I'm working through. Particularly over the past 2 weeks, we have a special school. Special school finance is really complex and incredibly tight. So that's been on my mind. I always liken the budget setting process to going on a holiday when you're planning a holiday. And I always say to head teachers, you're going to plan to go to the Maldives. You're then sort of, after your first attempt, you maybe be sort of aiming for the Canary Islands. But in the end, it's going to be a stay-at-home vacation, and you're going to have to just shape out what sort of accommodation you can afford, because that's how the budget process seems to work. And it's trying to not dampen people's ambition and enthusiasm for what schools can deliver, but really understand the real risks that are present with, working with limited resources and making that work so that we can still realize the ambition that we have for young people. So that's on my mind.
Sounds tricky, that balancing the realism of the money you're given versus what you want to do for your children in your schools and your staff.
Yeah, it is tricky. And also, Nick, what's tricky is that it's not just about tempering the amazing things we want to do. It's increasingly about tempering the basic things that we need to do. And it's how you make some of those difficult judgment calls about how you allocate resource and where you allocate it to. And as a trust, hopefully we do that in the most equitable way possible, to make sure that we are focusing on the needs of those most vulnerable young people. But it's not easy. But we do it because public servants have a deep commitment and ambition to their communities, and they want to do the very best for them. So we always keep that in mind, and we do the best job possible.
So when things get tough, what sort of strategies do you use to give you the energy that you need to battle on through, John?
Yeah, a really good question. So I used to, well, my main strategy used to be to just not talk to anyone. I used to again, it links to what I was saying before. That sort of it's my issue. I need to deal with it. So I used to always um often spend 2 o'clock in the morning really thinking through some of those difficulties that we encountered. But what I've got better at is sharing those things with my executive team almost immediately, because I've learned that actually there is a lot of truth in the saying a problem aired is a problem shared, problem halved, and that becomes manageable. And of course, it's arrogant of me to think that I'm the one with the answers and I'm the one to find the solutions. So I've just got really good at immediately sharing some of those difficulties with the executive team straight away so that we collectively problem solve and we deal with those really quickly. And that's made a huge difference. But it doesn't stop me worrying, Nick. I still worry about things a lot, too much, really. And I think also it that I still have a tendency um, to feel disappointed with myself if I don't think we've reached the right solution. Um, and I think, but I definitely have got better with that. I've got a lovely family, and I come home, and what I don't do, Nick, ever, is talk about work at home, ever. And my wife and I don't talk about either of our works at home. So that gives us a space to just focus on family and the things that we do, and that works really well for me.
If you complete the following sentence, an effective leader is.
Someone who understands the leader they need to be for the people they are leading.
And how do you use your leadership to lift others up?
Gosh, that's a good question, Nick. Um, I think I'm generally an enthusiastic, sort of upbeat person who always is reasonably positive. I have my moments where I feel the world is ending, and I'll sit there with my team and sort of offload in that way. But actually, um, I'm very good at saying we can only focus on the variables that we have control of. Let's not focus on the uncontrollable variables. Let's focus on what we have control of. So I think I'm probably good at motivating people to focus on the things that we can make a difference with. And something that I constantly talk to the team about, and in fact my whole trust, and probably most people you speak to would say this about me, is that I feel that good leaders are good storytellers. The story you tell about your organization, the narrative that you shape, that's the vision that guides the organization and helps people make sense of the part that they play in it. And I always liken it to traditional stories or stories that you had read to you when you were young, and you wanted to hear those stories over and over again. Even though you knew the ending, you took comfort from the predictability of that end because you'd learned it. I think that's what leaders do. They tell the story of their organization so frequently, so often, that there is a predictability to the direction, the culture, and the ethos and the values of that organization. And I think that's something that I do all the time. I'm always repeating the values of the organization. I'm always telling the story of the things that we are aiming for. And I think what that enables us to do is ensure that people can see the part that they play in that story and actively contribute to the vision of the organization. And that's what I think I do. And hopefully that's what's contributed to the success of the Compass Partnership.
Storytelling's come up quite a lot with a number of my other guests, John. So what quality do you see in your children that you wish you had?
Good question. So I have three children, and they're 17, 19, and 21, so they're older. And I think I don't know how I've done it, Nick, but I'm quite risk averse. I think that links to my sort of tendency to worry, to always look for the worst case scenario and that's my natural risk management process. I imagine things the worst they could be, and I'll work my way back to hopefully prevent us getting there. My children don't have that. They absolutely embrace everything that comes their way and quite probably risk embracing. And I can see that um, that I think that they have had opportunities it's not that they've had more opportunities than me, although they probably have by nature of the upbringing that they've had, but they've seized the opportunities in a way that I didn't. And that's not just about um, sort of the nature of my upbringing. It's about me as a person as well. I would have avoided things that they don't avoid, and I think that will serve them well. You know, they definitely are citizens of the world. You know, they embrace the opportunity to go other places, and that they seek those opportunities, and they're particularly my oldest, actually reasonably unconventional in my sort of terms, in terms of how he sees his future working. He's going to be someone who doesn't follow a linear route like me. I left school, went to university, went straight into teaching. So I've never really left education, to be fair. He wants lots of opportunities, he wants those opportunities to be in different parts of the world. He calls himself a digital nomad, Nick. And I think that sort of reflects my children generally, actually. They're braver than I am, Nick. Absolutely, definitely braver.
So possibly linked, but another question I asked your delegates was, what leadership superpower do you wish you had?
Oh, that's good. There's a theme that's running through this whole interview, isn't there? I wish I was better at making calculated risks. And actually, I'm the founding CEO of the Compass Partnership. So, and I've been the CEO coming up to the end of my 7th year. And I think whoever comes next will, I think that next sort of generation of CEOs of trusts will need to be much better than I am at those calculated risks, to really realize the benefits of what that trust structure offers you, in terms of realizing the opportunities out there that you can take. And I just know I'm not that person. And I've got people on my team that are, and I've been very careful to make sure I surround myself with people that have completely different skill sets to me. But I think that's the superpower I wish I had. I wish I was just more comfortable with some of that uncertainty. I'm not good with uncertainty, Nick.
So you've mentioned that about whoever follows you whenever that happens. Thinking then about what you've learned along the way and the superpowers that you have. What would the best advice be that you would give to a learning leader or to a successor, John?
So, gosh, that's a really good question. I think that I would say three things, Nick. Always be humble. Or I always assume people will be able to do it better than I can. And that drives me. And I think that will always mean that I'm looking to empower and enable, rather than direct and tell. So I think that's important, because I think in an organization like a trust of schools, complex, all of that interplay between school, trust, and all of the teams in the trust, I think is important that as a leader, you are humble and you recognize the skills and the talents of your team, and you enable them to thrive, and you recognize that, that's really important. The second one, I think, is to be absolutely crystal clear and confident about the values that underpin the culture of your organization. And that has to be a consistent and diligent focus of yours. So I'm always focused on culture, always focused on ensuring that actions align with words. And I think that's important. And I think we neglect that at our peril. And I'm always saying to people, culture is what happens when you're not there. And that which you walk past, you condone. And I think that's fundamental. So I notice everything. I comment on most things. And I will always have a feedback conversation with people about those things. I think that's really important. And then the third thing, I think, which is probably the one I should have started with, which is the most important thing, which is remember we're here for children. And we have to ensure that our decisions are made to improve outcomes for children. And of course, we have to ensure that we support our teams to be in the best place possible to meet those needs. But children are fundamental. And it's easy, I think, in the trust to become overly focused on some of the other things, like the business type stuff, at the expense sometimes of focusing on children. And again, in the Compass Partnership, the children are fundamental to every decision we make. And if a decision we make is not going to improve the experience of children and their outcomes, then we're not going to make that decision.
Unfortunately, we're nearly out of time, so I can probably only ask one last question. And that's because my last question was, what brings you joy as a leader? A large proportion of joy, 80%, whatever you want to set it out. What brings you joy?
So today I've been in I've been in one of our schools. That's what brings me joy. The going into schools and seeing everything that schools do so brilliantly. They're full of laughter, they're full of energy, they are creative, they are bright, and they fill me with hope always for the future. And I feel absolutely blessed to be able to do that, because if anything's getting me down, or I'm slightly worried about what's happening in the world at the moment, or I'm dwelling on particular things, I go into a school and I absolutely feel confident that those young people will grow up to be adults that do brilliant things, and I feel that they will be the remarkable leaders of the future that we need. I love going into schools, and that's what drives me. I don't have an office, Nick. Literally, where I turn up, I find a table, and that's where I will be. So I'm always on a grand tour of the schools, because that's what I absolutely love. I like to see that the impact of the work we're doing, and I see that best in the schools that we are nurturing, and they are schools are brilliant places.
That's a perfect place to draw our session today to a close. So thank you so much for joining me today, John, and thank you for sharing so candidly as well.
It's a pleasure.
And now for part 2 and some discussions from the conference floor at the ASCL annual conference earlier this year. Welcome to the latest edition of Ed Influence. I'm Nick McKenzie from Brown Jacobson, and today I'm chatting with leaders at the Association of School and College Leaders annual conference in Liverpool.
Julie McCulloch, Director of Policy at the Association of School and College Leaders.
What's on your mind this week?
What's on my mind this week right now is we're talking here at ASCL's annual conference, where we have about 1,000 people working in schools and colleges across the UK who come together to listen to speakers, to network, to talk to us as their trade union about what they want us to do, essentially. So lots on my mind.
My name is Peter Kent. I'm a former president of ASCL. I'm now one of ASCL's trustees, and I'm also just finished being president of the International Confederation of Principals.
What is on your mind this week?
What's on my mind is the way in which ASCL has changed and developed in the 10 years now since I was ASCL president. And I was reflecting when John Camp gave a fantastic keynote to open the conference, that my final act as ASCL president was to bring through the rule change that admitted primary members to ASCL. I was thinking how positive that has been for the organisation and how far we have travelled and what a wonderful contribution colleagues like John have made, summed up by what I thought was an absolutely first-rate keynote from him.
Hi, I'm Anna Crought. I'm the School Improvement Director at Heart Academies Trust, which is a multi-academy trust based in Bedford.
What is on your mind this week?
So this week is International Women's Day, which is absolutely amazing, and it's wonderful to celebrate all the fantastic female leaders we have in our organisation and across the education sector. My massive aim on International Women's Day is not just to think about my achievements, it's about how that will leave a better space for women coming through in future years. I always think about it being, I want to leave a ladder for all the women to keep climbing up that ladder that we're going to smash that glass ceiling.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Blois. I'm the Head of Education at Brown Jacobson.
What is on your mind this week?
So, particularly this week, I think on my mind I've got the challenges of containing workload when things come out of left field that you haven't necessarily budgeted for, time or energy-wise. So yes, been a little bit, but towards the end of my energy spend for this week, yeah.
I'm Emma Volchin. I'm co-chief executive of the National Governance Association.
What is on your mind this week?
Oh, well, I suppose being here at the ASCL conference, I'm thinking about school leaders and how, as an organisation, we can be as indispensable and supportive of school leaders in shaping and supporting their boards as possible. And we're thinking a lot about workload, so school leader workload as well as governing board workload, and really trying to bring to life practical strategies that support boards to be more effective and efficient, and equally not placing any increased burden on school leaders.
When things get tough for you, what sort of strategies do you use to give you the energy you need?
A range of strategies, I guess. I mean, I always try to get a sensible balance between what I'm doing at work and what else is going on in the rest of the world. It's not always easy, particularly, my job involves keeping up with the news as much as anything else, so it's quite hard to switch off. But yeah, so trying to kind of get out for walks, talk to my kids. They always keep you grounded, don't they? And yeah, just trying to achieve some sort of balance.
When things get tough, what sort of strategies do you use to give you the energy you need?
I think that is a great question. Perhaps there's no one strategy because it depends upon the situation. I think you do need a high degree of resilience in any leadership role, whether it's in education or any other walk of life. I've just come from a seminar on ethical leadership. I was one of the commissioners on the ethical leadership group that drew up the report. And I think knowing that you are doing the right thing is absolutely key to it. I think it's much harder to keep going if you don't know that what you're doing is the right thing, not the popular thing, but the right thing. And one thing I've always found is where I've got myself into a bit of a mess is when I haven't been true to myself. It's a great bit of advice from Polonius and Hamlet, who says, above all else, to thine own self be true.
When things get tough, what sort of strategies do you use to give you the energy you need?
I always have started now to stop and pause. I used to be in my first stages of leadership, I had to solve every problem now. Whereas I've learned now actually the time to reflect on what you need to do is actually better than doing something straight away.
And when things get tough, what sort of strategies do you use to give you the energy you need?
So this is not a terribly revolutionary thought at all, but actually one of the things I've learned the hard way is actually how incredibly important doing the basics is when you're at risk or running low on energy. And by that I mean eating well and regularly and drinking plenty of fluid. Sleep obviously helps as well, but actually I don't think there's a great deal of complexity to it. It's doing the basics to avoid that energy depletion, I think, is a really important thing. Yeah.
When things get tough, what sort of strategies do you use to give you the energy you need?
Well, I've got a fairly young family, and a dog. Like, go out with them for a big walk. I do swimming, and that kind of is a bit therapeutic. It, I suppose, gives me space away where you're thinking about your breathing. You're just focused on that one thing. And treat yourself, I suppose.
Could you complete the following sentence? An effective leader is
adaptable. I think leadership, you have to, sometimes it's about being directive, sometimes it's about being collegiate. I think it's about judging what the situation is and how you respond.
An effective leader is?
I would say a moral leader, an ethical leader, and someone who builds trust and community.
An effective leader is?
I want to say the cheesy answer, inspirational, but I probably want to say is somebody that is approachable and that people can talk to and that can leave a leadership space better than when they move on.
So an effective leader is?
An effective leader is someone who has a real passion for what they do and wants to share that with other people.
So an effective leader is?
Somebody who I think inspires others and brings a team along with them to a sort of the same goal, I was going to say, to bring about better outcomes for children and young people, which is kind of what we're in it for, right?
How do you use your leadership to lift others up?
I heard something really interesting recently, actually, where somebody was talking about delegation and talking about how it's really easy to delegate the parts of your job that you don't like. And that's really tempting. I'm sure we all do that to some extent. But actually, if you're looking to think about succession planning and to try to give opportunities to other people for the future, actually do the harder thing and delegate some of the stuff that you would really like to do, but you think it would be really beneficial to somebody else to do. So I try to do some of that.
How do you use your leadership to lift others up?
My leadership takes a variety of different roles. Now I'm working quite a great deal across borders, across jurisdictions. I think because I'm slightly advanced in my leadership journey, I try and share experience, try and share positive experience, and above all, focus upon hope and positivity and the way in which leaders can bring hope and positivity to others.
How do you use your leadership to lift others up?
I like to think that whenever I go into our schools, I go in with a smile, I go in with the energy, I go in with the positivity, because teaching is tough. And sometimes people just want to sit, offload, but they also don't need always advice and guidance, but they need a really safe space to share where they're going. And I think having that opportunity for staff is really important.
How do you use your leadership to lift others up?
So I'm not sure whether so I don't want to get into too much detail about the physical positioning of whether I'm lifting other people up, but I've always been really taken by the concept that a leader actually doesn't always lead from the front. Actually, sometimes they lead from behind by getting behind people and almost pushing them rather than pulling them from the front. And that's not always the right thing to do, but I think it is something that can easily be overlooked in the sort of leadership toolkit.
So celebrate their successes and work hard to appreciate the strengths that there are in the organisation, both celebrated internally, but like to shout about it outside as well. Obviously, you sometimes have staff who aren't so keen as to have that, but finding the way that somebody wants to be appreciated and kind of filling that space is probably what I do best, I would say.
What quality do you see in your children that you wish you had?
So I'll talk about my own children because I'm not school-based. I've got, well, one teenager now, one 20-year-old. I think what I love about the way they engage with the world is they're incredibly thoughtful and they're incredibly committed to the future and to making the future as good and as fair as it can be for everybody. I think those are really laudable qualities, and actually I think this generation has it in spades.
What quality do you see in your children that you wish you had?
I think their ability to embrace new ideas and new changes, ideas that seem quite revolutionary to me, such as, for example, the use of artificial intelligence and the way it can be applied in education. They just take in their stride and see it as exciting. So I think their mental agility and adaptability is something I wish I had.
What quality do you see in your children you wish you had?
So I'll go my own child, not the children we teach. I have a 7-year-old little girl that has such self-belief, such self-confidence that she can walk into a room and say, "Mummy, don't I look great today?" And I just wish every young child, especially our young women, had that self-confidence throughout their lives.
What quality do you see in your children you wish you had?
Lots, many, yeah. So I think the one I'd probably highlight is what I call bounce back ability. And I think that's slightly different from resilience. I think resilience is obviously really important, but I think young people, including my twin daughters who are 23, they do have this incredible ability on the whole to bounce back very quickly. So when something gets difficult or challenging, to find their way back to where they were before and then set off again towards whatever target they're taking themselves forward on. And that's something that I find myself quite envious of sometimes.
What quality do you see in your children you wish you had?
Maybe they're a bit more fearless than me at that age, and definitely kind of carefree, which means they're sort of all about doing what they want to, and sort of, I think, without overthinking something, less complicated perhaps.
What leadership superpower do you wish you had?
I suspect this is not a unique answer, but I would say Hermione Granger's time turner, please.
What leadership superpower do you wish you had?
There are a large number of leadership superpowers, but I know I haven't got. I think probably the one I most admire, but I think is missing, is the ability not to be concerned by what others think or say about you. I think looking back, sometimes I was rather too bothered, and I think I should have lent harder on that principle of do the right thing and just go with it.
What leadership superpower do you wish you had?
My leadership superpower would be to be able to instill that confidence in everybody day in, day out.
What leadership superpower do you wish you had?
Only the one. I wish there are many superpowers I wish I had. I think the most useful one would be, and this is going to sound a little bit scary, but I think being able to have a superpower where you could really understand without any doubt what makes a person tick would be invaluable. And I don't mean what I'd like to see inside someone's head and see what they really think. I think it's much more focused than that. It's really understanding at a completely pure, authentic level the things that really matter to them. That would be very, very useful as a leader, a superpower, very much so.
What leadership superpower do you wish you had?
Oh, I don't really know the answer to that question. There's probably too many. I think it is sort of making people feel even more special and that they are really appreciated. So each of us comes to life and brings to any situation our stuff, like the way that the world reacts to us and the way that we find ourselves in it. And I think everybody experiences some sort of adversity. And I try to work with children and young people and the staff team actually to translate whatever they think is perhaps their worst thing to make it actually be their biggest strength. So I kind of think that is the superpower, is just being able to translate a negative into a positive.
Thank you for joining me. I've thoroughly enjoyed the discussion we've had over the last couple of days and hope you have had too. One final thought I'd like to leave you with, reflecting on key messages from the conference, is thinking about your role in your organisation. How do you bring optimism and hope to the people, to the teams that you lead?